Good evening. You're very welcome to this week's episode of Centre Ground. And tonight I put the spotlight on the cost of justice in Ireland. And my guests are Majella Rippington, who is a lay litigant from County Kildare, and we met Majella a few weeks ago, and Ned McCarthy, a farmer from County Cork. Then later on, as always, Dr. Peter Dunne will chair our panel discussion on the hot topic of the week. Before we begin, I would just invite you to go to the Irish Inquiry website, and if it is possible, you can go to the drop-down box and you can enter details there of how you can help us. Perhaps you have editing or videography skills, or maybe you may like to donate to the Irish Inquiry. None of us get any payment for what we do, but there are overhead costs. As I said, the spotlight this week is on access to justice and the cost of justice. And I suppose really what brought me to this point is that those of you who follow my Facebook page will know that I spent 4 days this week in the High Court in the case of the eviction of the McGann family in Strokestown in County Roscommon. And on Monday, Judge Leonie Reynolds noted that Judge Senan Allen had made an order in October 2019, and that order still stands. It hadn't been appealed, and therefore Anthony McGann, retired Garda Kevin Taylor, and Colin Granahan were in contempt of court, and she remanded them indefinitely in custody until they purged their contempt of court. And I interviewed Donal Hanley, who is a personal friend of the McGann family and their spokesperson, in a live stream on Friday night. And among the points that he made was the cost of appealing Judge Senan Allen's order, that when people arrive at that point where they end up in court with the banks, that they're already in financial difficulties, so they don't actually have the money to appeal to a higher court. And I suppose that really was a huge eye-opener for me. You know, it was always there simmering in the back of my mind, the cost of going to court, but it's a very simple point. And I have done a little bit of research in the last couple of days, and I realised that this is a sticking point in a lot of these evictions, that the people who have got into difficulties with the banks have not been able to employ a legal team to fight their case in court. And so tonight, I suppose I will kickstart the conversation with Majella Rippington, who as a lay litigant has acquired a great deal of expertise in this area. Majella, you're very welcome to Centre Ground.
Thank you, Anna. And I'll just a caveat on the expertise. I've had the opportunity of being in the courts for 10 years, and I've sat in on many cases with fellow litigants, and had notated a lot of information and learned a great deal from the bench, what stands and doesn't stand. So maybe if I impart that, it might be of some use to some people, but it's not legal advice, just to be clear on that.
Okay. And so we're not going to speak on the specifics of the McGann case tonight, or indeed on the specifics of your own case, but from your experience of observing what's going on in court, just on that point of a High Court judge issues an order to a family to vacate a property, and they do have, I believe, the right to appeal that to a higher court. Could you talk us through that process, please?
I can do, because I actually was in the vacation sitting on a little court assignment in August 2019, and there was a very senior judge presiding at the time, and there was a gentleman before the court in exactly the same position, and he was quoting the law that he felt he should not have go to jail that day. There was an application before the court for committal for not standing by the order. And the judge was very clear, and she said, an order of the High Court is the law. Now that should really sink in with all of us. And she said, I am not going to break the law, I'm going to uphold the law. Now, she genuinely did not want to incarcerate that gentleman that day. So myself and my colleague, we wrote 3 things down on a piece of paper and told him during the lunch break, say this to the judge and you will not go to jail. So we managed to get him out of going to jail that particular day, and he informed the judge that he had got these notes. So basically what it boils down to is, once there is an order of the court, that order carries power and it is binding and you are bound to the law. In order to appeal that, it's not necessarily nearly an appeal, it might be to set aside, it depends on why you say that order carries no legal effect, or whether an order was obtained maybe by fraud. But once you're in the position where an order is in place, until that order is rescinded, set aside, appealed, removed, stayed, whatever, it stands and it travels and it comes into immediate effect. And lay litigants particularly, no person should be in the court defending their home against a bank without legal expertise, or what is called effective access to the court, where you have a professional advocate. And the reason you need a professional advocate is because you are in common law, and you would need a wealth of information such as common law, because you have to to win your cases, you must be able to cement your arguments with precedent, and you need a lot of binding precedent. And lay litigants, do not have access to court reports and to these precedents, and it needs a wealth of expertise to be able to do this. When you go into an appeal, you're appealing to the appeals court, which is a right. It's not it is a right that you have to appeal. In any situation, you always have the right to appeal. Where to get to the Supreme Court, maybe on an element of justice or a breach of constitutional right, you have to get permission. It's a request to go to the Supreme Court. But lay litigants, when they go to the appeal court, they're almost limited, because the appeal court, you have to be able to meet what's called the principle of the Hay and O'Grady. And if you're not able to meet the principle of the Hay and O'Grady, and I've heard this echoed many, many times in directions hearings, where the judge, various judges on the day, would emphasize to litigants, if you cannot meet the principle of the Hay and O'Grady, whereby the High Court, the appeal court cannot disturb the finding of fact of the lower court, they didn't have the benefit of hearing the evidence. You also can't introduce new evidence in appeal. So going into an appeals process is a very, very highly skilled element. There are lawyers who don't even want to go in there. And lay litigants and people in particular facing the banks, they want justice. You're in the courts to get law. Justice is a concept. So you need a vast array of an understanding of the legal system. You need to understand the common law, you need to understand the precedents, you need to understand constitutional rights, and you cannot be in there without the wealth of superior court rules and to understand the superior court rules. So when you put all those elements into the mix, a lay litigant really has no chance of succeeding. And while they're there, the costs are travelling, because one of the important elements not spelt out to litigants, or to any litigant, whether represented or not, the economic interest of the court is vitally important. And cases can be won and lost. You will see submissions are prepared for the appeals court, and thousands of words are often going into submissions, 5,000, 10,000 words. And in principle, you only need 750 words to win your case. And I saw myself in a document where an appeal was just being thrown out, was being won just on one paragraph. And I read the paragraph and I thought, oh my God, that appeal, particularly myself, I had no chance, because I saw the appeal disposed of in one paragraph. Now, it took me a long number of years to get to that point. And when you're a lay litigant, you really are too emotionally attached. It is your home or business or something that's at stake. And the cost of the High Court is on average €60,000 per day. And
what? Sorry.
The High Court can run as high as €60,000 per day.
Are you serious? Majella,
Anna,
are you serious?
I can actually put that to you on paperwork. I can also tell you with certainty that in the administrative court, which has no cause of action, in the administrative courts where I had got the experience down in the probate court, costs were 50,000, 65,000, 100,000 and 210. And on that particular day, the presiding judge said there was a cat and dog fight going on between two barristers, for the costs were 65,000 before there was any cause of action. And the judge said, in particular, she knew of one case that had cost 100,000, but the estate was huge. Now, I was in court for that particular day where there was an estate that had already run up 100,000. The costs are disproportionate to begin with, and the inordinate delay in our legal system is beyond belief. And a recent judge from County Kildare spoke out about the fact that we took our law from the UK, which was the greatest gift to the world, the common law, and we were the first adventurers of the common law. But he said we did not reform and move on, and we have not reformed. So we still have people who are struggling with the banks find themselves going into what's called the litigation process. And in the litigation process, that can span up to 10 years. So you are looking at 7 to 10 steps in the ordinary litigation that can take you on a very long journey. And nobody asks at the outset, do you have the money? Because you are dealing with a legality and a debt on you in what's called the civil legal system. And the civil legal system is the private sector. And likened maybe to healthcare, there is no insurance for you to avail of the private skills that you need. And there is no public system for the civil law, for the civil system. There is no public element likened to private hospitals and public hospitals. So there is no public system for what is civil between parties where you are in the civil legal system as opposed to maybe the criminal system. So there's a vast difference, and we are trying to deal with our day-to-day legalities, whether it's divorce, whether it's family law, whether it's probate law, whether it's banking law, personal injury, all of those areas of law for the common man, for the ordinary citizen, is dealt with in the most expensive process that you can find. And it is just, even if you were to go out and set charges tomorrow for the sector, it wouldn't fix the problem, because the costs, once you go into that, it's like being in a trap. There is no way out unless you choose not to defend yourself and just take the hit. I was in the court one day when a lady walked in, and she had never been in court before, and the judge thanked her for coming in because it was the last day to get an order against her. And she said, my husband died a few months ago, our house is in negative equity, and she was there to hand over the keys effectively. And the judge thanked her for coming in, for giving her the opportunity to make the order, and said, oh, I will take the costs out of the estate, out of the house. And that lady, to me, that day, she didn't fight for justice, she didn't fight for anything, she had nowhere to go. And even if she had somewhere to go, she wouldn't know how to access it. So she just stood there and took her lot. There was no equity left in the house. The bank were getting the house, and that was it. But the cost of the court is priority. It's the first thing that comes before the court. We as citizens are worrying about our home, our businesses, or whatever we're going to lose that day. But what is important is the economic interest of the court. And the court is always looking at where they're going to get their costs from. And very eminent.
Can I hold you? Can I hold you there, Majella?
Yes, certainly.
This is something that I have only learned in the last couple of days. I didn't realize that all of the costs of the court are actually added on to the original loan. So say I took out a loan of €200,000 and I owed the bank 180,000 and there's a repossession order got, then that you could end up owing maybe 400,000 because all of the costs of litigation are added on to the loan. Is that correct?
Yes, from what I understand, you see, you have to remember you're in a private legal system and it's not free. And it's more than just what a barrister or counsel might cost you or what your solicitor might cost you. There is a very long process and a lot of paperwork. You also have your stamp duty, you have your court fees. You're not paying for the actual court, you're not paying for the judges, but what you are paying for is, along that step of litigation, there are lots and lots of motions along the way. You don't just go in and get your hearing. There's an awful lot of travel over several years just on motions, maybe motions for discovery, maybe all kinds of motions. And then there are injunctions and various, the rules of the Superior Court are often abused to win a case. So if somebody, for instance, didn't have a good case, they might succeed if you're very skilled on procedural law. So I remember telling the court one time, we had all the case and no expertise, and our opponents had all the expertise and had no case. And a barrister can go in because you're in what's called an adversarial system, and it's about best debate, best fight, best competition. You are in a competition in the courts, and people come out of the courts and they wonder, they say, oh, that wasn't the true narrative, or the barrister lied and they put stuff in the affidavit, and oh my God, this isn't true. And then you don't know how to change that narrative. So it's about best fight to win a competition. You are not going into the court based to get justice. You are supposed to bring in the facts, and the facts should stand. But time and time again, you will see people being tricked because there are so many strategies at play that it really is a minefield, and there isn't enough time this evening to go into it in depth. I have spent a lot of time myself unraveling what I have found, and sometimes I feel I'm in this very isolated bubble with what I have found, which is disturbing to say the least. And you could even go so far as to say, and I say this very cautiously, and I have believed myself, and I do say and believe, I have found what is an element of asset stripping, potentially racketeering, and an element of money laundering, because we're not backed up in our court system with robust legislation. And legislation is made by the legal sector. I'm challenging a piece of proposed legislation myself, which I have come full circle. And after a lot of work and writings that I did, I now see changes happening behind the scenes, where I went looking for changes and steps were taken based on what I discovered and what I put out there, but I can't get it out there and get it exposed. And when I go to public representatives who are practicing in the courts, they run a mile. Law firms who see what's going on, they run a mile, and I now understand why they run a mile. And there are practitioners out there who cannot, even if they wanted to, help the lay litigants. And litigants think you can go to a solicitor and that's going to fix everything. The solicitors out there practicing, many of them have many of the same difficulties. It is an extraordinary minefield down in the courts and within the legal system, that we have created this labyrinth of process, strategy, confusion, and sometimes we find the law tripping itself up and it has nowhere to go. And
okay,
again,
so maybe,
yeah.
Sorry, Majella, maybe, I'll just finish up on that point. And I think you have put that so eloquently. And what you're saying actually is supported by the Chief Justice, Mr. Frank Clark. And I think we'll look now at a very short clip from his address to the Flat Free Legal Aid Centre 50th anniversary conference in 2019.
You can have a very efficient, a very just, very speedy court system, but people may not be able to use it for all of the kind of reasons that we know. So there isn't an identicality between the support of the administration of justice and access to justice. And I think that does perhaps teach us one thing about access to justice. It isn't just, I think, the ultimate court decision at the end of a court process that delivers justice. It can be delivered in other ways too. If there is a fair, accessible, quick mediation service that solves people's problems, and particularly in the family law area, I think that's especially desirable, then that is justice as well. And it's part of the solution, and it may well be cheaper, and in many cases it may well be better, because a negotiated, mediated solution in family law is much more likely to stick than one which is imposed by a court against the will of individuals. So I don't think we should only focus on the court solution, as it were. Anything that provides an effective solution to the legal difficulties which people face can form part of the system.
Mr. Justice Frank Clark speaking at the conference to mark the 50th anniversary of the Free Legal Aid Centres, and I suppose it ties up very well with what Majella has been saying, that there is no justice really in the courts for the ordinary person who finds themselves in difficulties because the costs are just so excessive. Thank you so much for that, Majella, and we'll come back to you in a little while.
Thank you, Anna.
My next guest this evening is Ned McCarthy, and Ned is a farmer from County Cork, and Ned has found himself in court a number of times, but tonight he's just going to focus on just one, I suppose, court appearance that he made, and he sought to get redress through the courts, but failed. Ned, you're very welcome to Centre Ground.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. Thanks for having me on. I suppose just to build on what Majella said there, they said that justice is like the Ritz Hotel, that it's accessible to all, but the more money you have, the more accessible it is, and I think that's what's coming out here tonight. Thankfully, I haven't been in such a difficult situation as the people that Anna or Majella was describing, but yeah, I have ended up I was actually taken to the High Court on a court injunction, and so I know what it's like to be faced with the prospects of huge legal costs. Subsequent to that, the reason I was taken to the High Court because I was protesting over a dispute I had with a large cooperative about money. So subsequent to that, I decided to take a case to the district court to try and recoup that money, and as a result, I didn't discover till I got a copy of the court order that the order had been made based on the wrong claim notice. So I felt I was treated very fairly in the district court now, to be fair. But when I got a copy of the court order, there was the wrong claim notice appended to it. So I decided I'd seek a judicial review. So I went to the High Court, and of course, my application to seek permission for a judicial review was rejected. And on the back of that, I appealed it to the European Court of Human Rights on the basis of a case. It was Erie versus Ireland. It was 1979. It would have been a woman in Cork. She was seeking to get illegal separation from her husband, and she successfully appealed to the European Court of Human Rights based on the fact that she couldn't afford access to justice, and on that occasion, it's actually the basis of free legal aid for family law in this country. So I referenced that case in my application to the European Court of Human Rights. I also actually, incidentally enough, I referenced Frank Clark as well, and a number of other. There's been a lot of that kind of thing in the public domain, statements like Frank Clark has made. And to make a long story short, anyway, my application in the European Court of Human Rights was turned down. I feel maybe I was a bit unlucky. There was an Armenian judge who adjudicated on it, but I would encourage anyone, because the reason when I spoke to you about this, the reason if you can get anything out of tonight, I would suggest that anyone who is trying to get access to the court and is prevented from doing so because they can't afford it, I would encourage anyone to go on that website, make an application to the European courts, And maybe someday we'll get lucky and there might be a court in Europe who will hear our cries for help and say, look, people in Ireland don't have access to justice, and that is a basic human right. You know, that's the yeah.
Your application to the European Court of Human Rights was turned down on the basis that you hadn't exhausted all of the courts. Yeah. So just to be clear on that, you have to exhaust all of the various courts. So you have to take it from the district to the circuit to the High Court to the Supreme Court. Yes. And it's only at that point then that you could, but you more or less went straight from the district court, really, to the European Court.
No, I went straight from the High Court.
Oh, from the High Court.
I sought permission from the High Court to seek a judicial review based on the fact, and to say I sought a judicial review was kind of, I don't want to cast any aspersions on the judge in question because he behaved very honourably. I believe there was a clerical error took place, and I didn't find that out until I got a copy of the court order. And what I was really seeking in the High Court is they would take it back in front of the judge so that would allow him to see the correct documentation. You know, that was my case to the High Court. It was a clerical order, but I suppose as well as that, I was hoping that maybe the European Court would look upon it, because I knew since the time that there was a court injunction got against me and I was taken to the High Court before that. Basically, when you're in the High Court, and this is my personal opinion from my limited experience, thank God, compared to other people, because I've never been in court about anything as serious as what you've outlined there. It's like the bully in the playground. He takes your ball, right? And he says to you, right, if you want it back, you have to fight me for it. I mean, the concept of this is frightening, because anyone with money in this country can abuse their position. They can take you to court, and if they've got pockets that are deep enough, you can't fight them. You know, and that's the reality, and that's not justice. You know, it's a frightening concept.
It's just to say it's not equality of arms, and that's very important, because one of the things that is clear, there is no dispute about getting access to the courts. Every citizen in this country has unlimited access to the courts, but what they don't have is effective access to the courts, and that is where they're properly represented in a specialist subject that they're not skilled for. In the same way, you can't be your own vet, you can't be your own dentist. Why should you try and be your own legal expert in a court of law, which is very, very complex and a very in-depth study?
I would only half agree with that statement, Majella, because, like, even if you do represent yourself, you could still, and it was looked for against me, that the other side could look for their legal costs. You know, you could go in and try and be as frugal as you could and try and save all the money you could and try not to put any expense on anyone, but the other side could still come after you for costs.
Yeah, it's not about having, even if you run your own case, you think you shouldn't have to pay costs. There is an Order 99 of the Superior Court rules which must be remembered, and that deals with costs. And the general rule in the court is that costs follow the event. Judges do have a jurisdiction to depart from fixing costs, but a person could win their case in the court and be fixed with the costs, where they're up against a man or woman of straw. You have to remember why you're going to court. You're going to court for a remedy, and in the civil courts, you're going there for either damages or specific performance or for some kind of injunction. And as to quote a very eminent journalist said on the Brendan O'Connor programme, that and it was a very important statement. She said, "We are in an adversarial legal system that does not reflect the compassion of the Irish people," and also went on to say that people are going to court for answers. It's not necessarily a monetary issue, or isn't sufficient for them. They don't want damages, they may want something else, and certainly people are going to courts looking for answers. But you have to understand how the private courts are operating as opposed to the criminal court, where the state is prosecuting, and it's against offences, injustices against society. But when you're dealing with injustices against one another, I'm dealing with an injustice that you've caused to me, or I've caused to you. You're going into a private system to settle that, which is completely and utterly unaffordable. And to quote the outgoing president of the High Court, he said that only millionaires, billionaires and paupers can afford to go to court. The people who are responsible for this, it's not anyone in the legal sector, it is us. We are the people who are totally and utterly responsible. We allow the legal sector to make our laws. We allow them to favour the laws in favour of the legal process. We allow regulation, the legal sector to regulate themselves. And as long as they are regulating themselves and making the laws to suit themselves, we are never going to have a proper legal system in this country. And it is so systemic what is going on in the legal sector. And you mentioned a court that was a clerical error. There are people all over the country tonight who are aware of the administrative error process. I have found orders that were written up for me for judges that never even heard cases. I went back into the courts and I got them addressed, and from 2017 I still cannot get my hands on those particular orders because I was like an open book. Everybody knew where I was going to go and what I was going to do next. So this thing of the clerical staff and the administrative process is very wanting in our Irish courts, and we have a system that is completely dysfunctional throughout every element of that system, from making the laws to running the courts to the practice of law to the superior court rules being abused. And it is disturbing to see what's going on in our legal system. Our four courts is just a joke. It is an absolute joke. And anybody who thinks that they're going to go down there and effectively practice law or defend themselves really is making a grave mistake. And I know myself what I need to do for my cases, but the skill set that I require to do it is beyond belief. And I've even had direction from the bench on where to go and what to do, and particularly maybe setting aside orders that may have been obtained on fraud. And I notated that, and a friend notated it for me. So
okay, we won't stray in, Majella. We won't stray
there is a huge amount of work.
Yeah,
involved for legal people.
Okay.
For non-legal.
Okay. I now can I just kind of bring this particular section of our program to a close, because I know that Peter is waiting patiently to begin part two. I just want to say that the overall message that's coming across very, very strongly to me tonight is that our legal system is dysfunctional, and the blame lies with us, the Irish people, that have allowed.
Can I just say one thing, Anna? Can I come in?
Just a very quick point.
Very
yes.
briefly. I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. We're ourselves and the UK are the only two countries in Europe that have this problem, and that's why I think the answer to this lies in Europe. We're the only two countries in Europe that has this system where you could lose your house by trying to seek the protection of the court, and that is not right.
Okay. So, and we'll just finish it then on that point, that our legal system is dysfunctional, and we, the Irish people, are to blame because we have allowed this to happen and we've done nothing about it. And I suppose the next point really is arising from tonight's discussion is what can we do about it, and how do we go about looking for change? And that, I suppose, is the subject matter for a programme in the new year. So if I can bring in Peter, you've been waiting there patiently in the wings.
Thanks very much, Anna.
Yes.
As always, a big shout out and a thank you to Stephen as well, because I think it probably bears repeating that Stephen does all of and his team do all of the technical work behind the scenes. So it does take quite a bit of work to get the program to air, and with that technical skill set that he and the team have. So thanks very much. And I think we may actually be speaking very briefly to Stephen in a few minutes. In relation to this week's hot topic question. Just one point that sprung to me from what Majella and Ned have said, and really it ties in with this week's hot topic question as well, and it's who watches the watchers. Maybe that's the job of the people we're going to talk about in this section. And this week's hot topic question is, and what I'll do is I'll introduce the question, and just by way of a few discussion points, I jotted down some notes there this evening, and just if I could just go through those, because I think it hopefully will add to that very rich thread of conversation that we've had with our guests this evening, and I think there's a lot of points I'll make actually that will chime with what Majella and Ned have said. And this week's hot topic question, without further ado, is: to what extent is mainstream media in Ireland independent? And I think there are a number of aspects to this, because we have to consider, firstly, falling newspaper sales and circulation, and a pivot to online platforms, and also the price and the convenience of newspapers vis-a-vis online platforms, and having information beamed instantly to your handheld device. Also, high overheads. So, for example, maintaining or hiring printing facilities, then with falling revenues, that means financial vulnerability. Costs may also entail the repercussions of a highly litigious society. So having to maintain legal departments, or at least access to legal services, which, as we've seen, can be in many instances prohibitively expensive and beyond the reach of the ordinary man or woman on the street. Then the race to create supplements to maintain readership and diversity of content, that's also increased costs, and I wonder to what extent it has maintained sales. So increased costs, but has it maintained sales to offset those increased costs? Then the content, quality and style of journalism has changed over recent decades towards credentialism, where many or most journalists have had to acquire journalism education. And what effect has that had? And then we've had the rise of the corporation and legal corporate personhood, and a concern for corporate image, and what we call, or what we could call, and what others have called, perception restructuring. And in that regard, there is a very good quote from a gentleman called Edward Bernays, and he's often regarded as the father of modern public relations. And in one of his books called Propaganda from 1928, he wrote, and I quote, "The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, and our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. It is they who pull the wires that control the public mind." And I'm thinking, what's the root cause of all of the points that I've tried to make so far? Is it due fundamentally to technological disruption from the internet in terms of how it's affected information accessibility and flow, as well as the cultural shift towards instant gratification, also caused by the appeal of literally having information a mouse click away, or pointing to a touch screen, so having the world at your fingertips, so to speak. And then another very germane point, and probably comes back to some of what our guests were saying in some ways. What about the revolving door between institutional power and journalism, the very thing that journalism is supposed to hold to account as the fourth estate? So what this means in practice is that the interests of parties which should stand in opposition to each other are actually in alignment. And thus, what happens is that further amplifies the power on one side, the power of the powerful, and it amplifies the vulnerability of the vulnerable on the other side of that dialectic, of that dynamic. And what that does is it neutralizes one of those checks in our democratic system, which relies on a series of checks and balances to mitigate the effects of powerful interests, to shape and to mold the world as best benefits them, and usually doing so to the detriment of society as a whole. So ultimately then, what about journalism? Shouldn't journalism be about, rather than being aligned with powerful vested interests, shouldn't it be about holding those to account? And I know in that regard, one of the final point I want to make really is ultimately what are we seeing with the mainstream media, or with what some have referred to as the legacy media? Are we seeing the law of diminishing returns applying to the mainstream media in much the same way as it's applying to another sector which has been in the news and which is very topical, that being the pharmaceutical sector? So again, just to come back to our hot topic question, to what extent is mainstream media in Ireland independent?
Okay, would you like to come in on that point, Majella? Do you think that mainstream media is independent?
No, I don't. I think it is under threat. I'm not very good on this topic, but what I do know from my own capacity on it, I've noted that, and it has been reported, the annual Freedom Press Index, for example, Ireland fell from 9th place down to 14th. And there is a very highly concentrated ownership of media. The media ownership in Ireland poses very serious threats to press freedom. I know myself, as just a person going about my business, I rely very heavily on the very good reporting that we get. Say for our main station, RTE, we get a lot of strong reporting. I think we have a very high standard and quality of journalists in this country, and they have to have the freedom and to do their work and to report. And we also have a difficulty with getting access to information, and where our journalists are being obstructed and locked out of getting very clear information. But if we didn't have our press holding to account our government and other areas of society, we really would be very, very lost. We have technology. Technology is growing so fast that we have such quick access now to the world, and we're finding that we have new threats where people can go online and say things out of place. You can have cases now for slander and for libel so easily just on the net, and we have too many public people in power and in public representatives who are going on Twitter. If I could shut down Twitter, I think Twitter should be shut down. It's giving access to fake news and bad news and bad conduct with people who don't act with good behavior or legal permission to put out there what they're circulating. But I think I'd love to see our protections in place for freedom of the press. We had cases many years ago where journalists were being bugged, and there was a big hullabaloo about that. We have some very good journalists, and they do powerful investigation work in this country, and we are indebted to them to do that. And we have to fight to give them the freedom and the power to do their job, because without it, I think we are one of the most corrupt countries in the world, and we have governments who see no issue with corruption. And every day this week we're hearing it, where our Taoiseach and ex-Taoiseach is being held to account for political appointments. And if we didn't have the press reporting accurately and positively on that, we would be lost. So I would like to see our good, strong journalism protected and appreciated properly in our community.
Okay, thank you.
I know
that so much.
They may not deal with the question directly, but it's just where I'm coming from. That
yes, that's exactly what we want.
But I do think they're censored, and I think there's censorship there. That's not helpful.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much for that, Majella. Ned, if I could bring you in, do you think that our mainstream media is independent?
No, not at all. Far from holding power to account, I think in many instances, they're actually making sure that people in power are unaccountable. I mean, the line between public relations and journalism in this country, it's very blurred at the moment. How often have you seen in the past number of years where people who are journalists get hired to be, working as advisors to ministers, whatever? It's happening all the time. And I think it happens not just in Ireland, because funnily enough, I was talking about this last night with my other half, who actually is a trained journalist. She qualified in Finland, but she worked as a journalist in another European country. And she clearly said to me last night, she said, look, when I was a journalist, like, she became a journalist because she wanted to change the world, you know?
Okay.
And when she was a journalist, she said, sorry?
Have you named that? Hello, can you hear me, Ned?
Yes. Yes.
I didn't get the beginning of this. I hope you haven't named any individual.
Oh God, no! God, no! No. I was talking about my other half, my partner Christine. She was a journalist, or she's a qualified journalist. She trained as a journalist in Finland, and she worked for a while as a journalist in another European country. And the reason she became a journalist is because she wanted to change the world. It's the biggest regret of her life. But she said, like, when she was a journalist, she wrote what she was told to write. Otherwise, she wouldn't have a job. You know,
right.
Be under no illusion, you know, that was her experience. And, you know, I do think that's the case. I mean, if you look around, you know, the amount of journalists, the career path seems to be that you become a journalist. And if you're lucky, you'll get hired to be some type of an advisor or a public relations person or a spin doctor or whatever. I mean, all you have to do at the moment is to, you know, listen to any of the mainstream media, be it radio or TV, and listen to the ads. You know, you cannot go through an ad break now without being reminded that the ads have been bought to you by the HSE or the government. You know, it's got worse in the last couple of years. It's got especially bad, I think, since the COVID thing, because, you know, did the local radio stations get 2.5 million or something to start of the year from the government? You know, of course they're compromised. You know, it doesn't take rocket science to work out that they are.
Okay. Well, I suppose, my view, well, just part of my view on it is that, you know, the individual journalist is different from the mainstream media. So I do think that, and I agree 100% with Majella when she says that there is excellent work being done by investigative journalists in Ireland. And there have been some absolutely superb RTE Investigates programs in even this year. So it's not mainstream media is not homogeneous. What is the word? Homogeneous. What's the word I'm looking for?
Homogeneous. Yeah. Sorry,
homogeneous.
And like I didn't mean to slander every journalist in the country. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure there is, and like I said, Christine, she's no longer a journalist, but she trained as a journalist and all that. So, like, these people are human beings as well, but human nature being what it is, I do believe that journalists are under an awful lot of pressure, you know,
yes.
and I would salute any journalist who sticks their neck above the parapet, and because I do believe they come under an awful lot of pressure to you know, to toe the line. I do believe that.
Well, first of all, you know, whether it be broadcast or print media, the journalist doesn't have permission to write what they like or say what they like. It all has to go through an editorial process, and so it's at that level then that it's controlled. If I could bring you back in, Peter.
Yes, absolutely, Anna. I mean, some wonderful points there made by both Majella and Ned. Again, just your last point, Anna, just to pick you up on. I mean, you're right. There is an editorial process in mainstream journalism, but what we're actually seeing, I think, is the rise again of the disruptive technology of the internet and the rise of the vlog or the blog, and the notion of independent journalists who can and very often do terrific work, and who do have that license that independence gives them. Although we have seen in many cases some very good quality independent journalists actually being censored on certain platforms this year without obviously naming them. But again, I think that's maybe a rebalancing of the relationship between the mainstream and what's referred to as the alternative media. The other issue, I think, in terms of you know, one point that Majella made, and again, you know, it is a valid point, that there have been some terrific investigative reports and reportage done by some of the mainstream media in Ireland. But if I could put it like this, I mean, there is a certain, you know, there's a cynical phrase, tolerated opposition. But if I could put it like this, that there's a kind of an envelope of prescribed investigative topics that can be covered, and maybe it might be interesting to speculate that there are certain topics that are sort of off the charts, that kind of are beyond reach, let's say, that can't be really scoped too deeply. And another thing I've noticed actually this year is with the mainstream is that what's actually very damaging, what can be more damaging than an outright lie, is the half-truth. So it's a bit like not the sin of commission, but the sin of omission, where facts are laced with let's say conjecture, but also not all of the facts are presented, or in fact not having both sides of a debate. And I've seen a lot of that actually this year when you look at what's presented in the mainstream as opposed to that broader range of information that's available primarily online. And just to go back to, if I may, the point that I finished up on, I think we hear a lot about corporate sustainability nowadays. One could be forgiven for thinking that there's a lot of cynicism infused into the whole sustainability agenda, but the author Nate Higgins refers to the financial representations of our transactional economy, of all of the energy of ourselves that the economy represents, the human ecosystem. And we're seeing in the mainstream media, we're seeing, I think, the law of diminishing returns kick in, which they've tried to address in some of those points that I was making earlier on. And it brings us to another sector which I think is experiencing a law of diminishing returns, which is the pharmaceutical sector, which brings us back, I think, to the topic which has enveloped us again all. I mean, it's at this stage, COVID-19. It has been the topic of the year in 2020. And I think one very important, in that regard, one very important aspect of journalism is to be able to self-critique, self-examine. And I think this is, where we kind of, we segue into Stephen's interview with Luke O'Neill recently. And, in asking the question, was Stephen right was it appropriate to doorstep Luke O'Neill? And the view would be abroad, I think, within society, certainly if one uses the online community of social media, that yes, there should be more parsing and more analysis of Luke O'Neill's position. And I just want to make it clear that we're not actually, I just want to make it clear, we're not actually impugning anybody's character. We're just, we're saying that people in the public eye need to be asked.
Can I interrupt you there, Peter? I think some people don't really know what you're talking about.
Okay.
What you're referring to there is Stephen from the Irish Inquiry doorstepped Luke O'Neill on his way out of his News Talk interview with Pat Kenny during the week. And maybe this is the Twitter version. This is an edited version, a 2-minute Twitter version of what actually happened. So maybe we could take a look at this now.
Given that SARS-CoV has already mutated, doesn't that lessen the chances of an effective vaccine?
No, actually, probably not. And if it does mutate, the RNA vaccines can be modified quickly.
Professor O'Neill admits here that when the virus mutates, a new RNA vaccine will be required.
Well, there's loads of vaccines in development. Anyone that works will be great.
So Luke confirmed here that any vaccine that works would be great, and that there are loads of different types of vaccines in development. In Ireland, we are currently in line for 5 different COVID-19 vaccines through the EU Advanced Purchase Scheme.
How can you be so sure of the safety of the RNA vaccine, seeing that there has been no long-term clinical studies carried out?
Once hundreds of thousands of people are vaccinated, you'll watch for that phase 4 safety analysis,
The average time to develop a vaccine pre-COVID-19 was 10.7 years. Luke stated clearly that phase 4 of the vaccine trials will happen on the first hundreds of thousands of people taking the new vaccine.
Yes, we don't know over months and years what effect this vaccine are going to have on the people.
We don't know that, that's true, but previous vaccines, 1 to 2 months safety data can predict long-term safety.
Today in Ireland, cases are still before the courts for the swine flu scare of 2010, where hundreds of Irish people's lives were ruined with rushed vaccines.
Do you think that the vaccine manufacturers should be held liable for any adverse health effects that may arise?
Don't know.
You don't know?
Currently, governments around the world have given legal cover to pharmaceutical companies.
How many vaccine manufacturing companies do you have shares in?
None.
Okay. You've no shares. And what about GlaxoSmithKline?
No shares in GSK.
But Glaxo do have shares in his company. They provided the 30 million in seed capital for Citrex, along with the vaccine private equity firm SV Investors.
I've no direct involvement with any big pharma, like being on the board.
Luke says that he has no direct involvement with Big Pharma. But in addition to the Glaxo investment link, Luke's company also signed an agreement with Eli Lilly for $880 million back in March 2020.
Do you stand to gain financially if the Irish government roll out a vaccine programme in Ireland?
No.
But if Citrex drugs / Eli Lilly immunometabolic anti-inflammatory therapeutic vaccines are used by states around the world, then Citrex will surely benefit financially because Luke is a founding member of the company.
Okay, you've been looking there at the edited Twitter version of Stephen Kerr's interview with Luke O'Neill when he doorstepped him earlier this week. And I know that a few people contacted me and they were quite annoyed by this interview. They said, first of all, that now it's the Facebook version, I think it runs to about 7 minutes. The first point that was made to me that this was a highly edited version of Stephen's conversation with Luke O'Neill. So just if I could bring Stephen in there, just to clarify that, did he, hello Stephen, just to clarify that, you're yes?
No, that was a one take wonder. There was no editing done at all in that. Like, it was put up as a 7-minute piece on Facebook. Obviously for Twitter it had to be edited down. You can only put like a 2 minutes and 20-second video up on Twitter. But the one that went up on Facebook and on YouTube, that's in its entirety. There's no editing done there.
Okay, and the other criticism that was kind of directed at you, both I know that on social media that there was an overwhelming positive response to that interview, but I did read one or two people criticise you, and one of the criticisms was that you were kind of pushing an anti-vax agenda. What would you have to say to those people?
Well, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I'm just asking a lot of questions that people seem to be asking online, and which the mainstream media and the big journalists who are on a couple of $100,000 a year aren't bothering to ask at all. So, I mean, I don't know, if you say that it's anti-vaccine, you can look on the other side of it and you can say all the mainstream media are very much pro-vaccine, I would say, because he's on, we can pick News Talk for one, and he's on there twice a week. And I haven't heard Pat Kenny doing any sort of level of questioning into this whole vaccine debate at all. It's pretty much whatever Luke says goes, and Luke's right.
Okay, so the issue really, and we want to be very careful on this, that this is not the programme or the centre ground is not really about, I don't want to get into the vaccine debate. So really, why we've picked this out is as part of our discussion on journalism and on mainstream journalists versus an independent journalist like yourself, that's free to be able to ask the questions that perhaps the journalists that are working for corporate mainstream media is not able to ask. So, Stephen, thank you so much for that, and I'll bring Peter back in.
Well, thanks very much, Anna, and again, thanks to Stephen. Actually, in my innocence, what I did, just out of curiosity, I watched the video with Stephen and Luke, and I kind of, I like to sort of pride myself, coming from the country, being a culture and so on. I know Dublin fairly well, and I wasn't quite sure where that was, so I kind of looked, I said, where's that? So, found out where it is. But that actually came in handy when I saw one of the criticisms, this notion that the video that had been put up was in somehow edited, implying selective editing. as if we need to say that. I mean, it's a bit like saying, you know, grave danger. So what I did was I played it and I paused. I counted all of the pauses. So the entire video that's put up is 7 minutes and 5 seconds. That's 425 seconds. The pauses are 130 seconds. And if you look at every point where it's paused, the point at which it restarts, it starts at exactly the same point in the streetscape. So what that implies is that there was no unaccounted for distance walked, or there was no unaccounted for time which was allowed to elapse. If you put the route into Google Maps, the route from Drury Street out onto Dame Street, just up from the east of the Central Bank, or where the Central Bank used to be, that's a distance of 450 meters, and it's rated by Google Maps as 5 minutes. Now, the actual time is 4 minutes 55 seconds if you count in, if you add that with the 130 seconds pause. So there was no editing. That's
okay.
You know, proof positive.
Peter, my goodness, that is that's the scientist coming out in you there. I definitely think now that what shall I say, that criticism has definitely been put to bed both by Stephen himself. Absolutely. And of course then, yeah. But I suppose the point now that we want to finish up on, I suppose I will go back to Majella and I will go back to Ned just for their final word on whether or not they think that mainstream media is independent, and then I'll give you the final word, Peter. So, Majella, if I could go back to you, is there anything that you would like to add to what has just been said?
No, other than just it's my view that it's not as independent as it should be or as we would like, and that's basically where I stand on it. And just if I could just say, on a personal view, I have a grave concern regarding the vaccine. I, like a lot of people, I would want to know what's in it, and I don't believe that the public will be told truthfully. There are so many vaccines coming out now, it is too confusing and it's difficult for the public to be informed. But I think when in doubt, the attitude, for me anyway, is leave it out. So as far as the vaccine is concerned, I certainly would be not willing to take it. Just wanted to put that point across, because I feel we should know precisely what's in a vaccine before we just jump en masse and say, oh, this is the next best thing to do, and we just take it, because I don't believe we're given the truth by our governments. And in the absence of confidence in the government, I'd be more afraid of the government than the COVID itself, because at least you can distance yourself from the COVID and protect yourself if you choose to do so. But in the meantime, I would be very skeptical about vaccines.
Oh, okay. So
I know it's a slight diversion, but it's what I wanted to hear.
You wanted to make that point, so you're going to adopt the precautionary principle. So I suppose that ties in with mainstream media. So the role of mainstream media then is to actually search for the truth.
Correct.
And to actually present all of this in a way that will leave people in no doubt. But what is the truth of the matter? Yeah. Okay, if I can, yes, Ned, bringing you in now.
Yeah. No, it's just when Peter was talking there and about this whole this whole thing to do with science, really. Both the British Medical Journal and the Lancet in the past couple of months have both issued very chilling warnings that they're gravely concerned about the level of censorship that scientists are under at the moment. Now, when the British Medical Journal and the Lancet, raise those concerns, I think it's time for us to sit up and take notice, because, our democracy is in danger at that stage. We're going back to the dark ages if we're not careful. I'll just leave it at that, because
Okay, Ned, that's a very, very interesting point. And now we're really way out of time. Peter, if I could just get to you to kind of tie up the final point, please.
No, absolutely, Anna. Thanks very much. And I mean, some fabulous contributions there from both Majella and Ned. And if I can just come back to the issue that we spoke about, really where you have any senior academic or senior clinician or person of seniority or influence in a society, where people, who has access to the public and the public mind and to penetrate the public consciousness. I think rather than merely having an attitude of what I might call fawning adulation, given the opinions and I shouldn't say advice, but given the information that is promulgated by senior, whoever they may be, senior academics, clinicians, administrators, bureaucrats, and given the very high stakes nature of that information, particularly in relation to COVID-19, I think there needs to be more rigor, and there needs to be more to come back to the legal situation. There needs to be a more adversarial and a more inquisitorial tone taken with people in that position, to have, if you like, to in powerful positions to propagate the interests of power in a high stakes game. And just coming back very briefly to a point that was made by Professor Samuel McConkie, in fact, on RTE, on Clareborn Live the other night, where he said that it's about creation of value, creation of a market, and about creating a desire by customers to have a product. And I just wondered when I saw that, were we just starting to see the first chinks of light, the light of truth, starting to break through the media edifice?
Okay, a very, very interesting question on which to end tonight's programme. I want to thank most sincerely my guests, Ned McCarthy from Cork and Majella Rippington from Kildare. And as always, absolutely superb work from Dr. Peter Dunne in chairing our panel discussion. I want to thank most sincerely Stephen Kerr from the Irish Inquiry and his team, who have made this live stream possible. I would ask you please to go to the Irish Inquiry website, to the drop-down box, if there is any way that you can help out by way of offering your editing skills or videography skills, please fill in the details. Or if you are in a position to make a donation to the Irish Inquiry, please do so. None of us take any money, but we cannot put this out. There's a cost involved. The website has to be hosted. There's insurance, there's overheads, there's even the ESB bill. So a donation would be most welcome. This brings to a close tonight's episode of Centre Ground. It also brings to a close Centre Ground for 2020, which surely will go down as a turning point in history. I will be back with you, please God, in the new year. I want to thank you most sincerely for your support over the last 12 weeks. I know that some of you watch in on a weekly basis. I really, really do appreciate your support. And I do appreciate all of your shares and likes and commentary. If you weren't involved and weren't engaged with us, we would be talking to ourselves. So until I see you in 2021, have a wonderful Christmas, and Bannock de Olive Galer, Iowa.